The quiet determination. In a small, dimly lit kitchen, the faint scratching of a pencil on paper was the only sound that broke the silence. Mary, a 10-year-old girl with messy brown hair that fell over her shoulders, sat hunched over a worn notebook. Her delicate face, framed by strands of hair, hid a fierce determination that belied her age. Her brown eyes, deep and thoughtful, seemed to carry the weight of a life far beyond her years. She was solving a complex math problem, her lips moving silently as she worked through the equations. Each line she drew on the paper felt like a brick being laid for a more secure future, a future she was determined to build for herself. The kitchen, with its peeling wallpaper and faint smell of burnt toast, was far from a sanctuary. But for Mary, it was a temporary escape. Here, in this small universe of graphite and paper, she could forget the chaos that often erupted around her. She could focus on the numbers, the logic, the certainty that math provided. It was a world where problems had solutions, where everything made sense. Suddenly, the sharp slam of a door shattered the silence. Mary's father's voice thundered through the room, harsh and unrelenting. "You always have to be right, don't you? Always finding a way to criticize everything." His words were followed by her mother's equally sharp retort, filled with anger and frustration. "And you? Have you ever thought about what you're destroying?" Mary's fingers tightened around her pencil, her knuckles turning white. She clung to the math problem like a lifeline, as if solving it could somehow shield her from the storm raging around her. The arguments were a cruel dance, a choreography she knew all too well. She had learned to tune them out, to focus on the numbers, to find solace in the logic of equations. "Mary, go to your room," her mother shouted, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Mary lifted her eyes slowly, hesitating. "But I just wanted to finish this," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. Her father's face hardened with exhaustion. "Now, Mary," he insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Without another word, Mary picked up her notebook and headed to her room, her head bowed as if carrying an invisible burden. Her small room, painted a faded blue, seemed to reflect her world, dim and worn. A narrow window let in a sliver of light, illuminating makeshift shelves filled with old books. Mary sat on the floor, crossed her legs, and returned to her notebook. "One day, all of this will change," she whispered, her voice a fragile defiance against the echoes of arguments outside. For Mary, math wasn't just a subject. It was a place where things made sense, where problems had solutions. It was her lifeline, her escape, and perhaps someday, the key to her freedom. She longed for a future where chaos could no longer touch her, where she could build a life on her own terms. She knew that with dedication and effort, she could achieve that. Knowledge would be her most powerful weapon. As she solved yet another problem in her notebook, Mary made herself a promise. "I will get out of here. I will be more than this." The classroom was her sanctuary, a place where the chaos of home couldn't reach her. Every lesson connected her to a bigger world, filled with endless possibilities. Sitting in the second row with her notebook open and her eyes fixed on the board, Mary seemed like just another student. But there was something different about her, something that made her stand out. Her hand was always the first to shoot up, her mind solving complex problems before the teacher even finished explaining them. Miss Judith, the math teacher, was a tall woman with sharp features and an aura of authority that silenced the students' chatter. She was known for her strict discipline, and to many students, her stern demeanor was intimidating. But to Mary, it reflected a deep love for mathematics. Miss Judith's passion for the subject was evident in every lesson, and Mary admired her for it. One day, as Miss Judith explained a new formula on the board, Mary noticed a mistake in the arrangement of the variables. Her logical mind couldn't ignore the error. Hesitating briefly, she raised her hand, her voice low but confident. "Excuse me, Miss Judith, I think there's an error in the formula. Shouldn't the variable be in the numerator, not the denominator?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Miss Judith, who froze for a brief moment. Slowly, she turned toward Mary, her expression hardening. "You think you know more than I do, Mary," she retorted, her voice laced with sarcasm. Mary blinked, surprised by the reaction. "No, ma'am, I just thought that might be a small error," she said, keeping her tone respectful. Miss Judith's gaze lingered on Mary for a long moment before she turned back to the board. "Let's continue," she said curtly, making a swift correction to the formula without further comment. Though the atmosphere remained tense, Mary's resolve only grew stronger. She knew that speaking up for what was right, even when difficult, was part of the journey to becoming the person she wanted to be, someone who thrived beyond the reach of chaos. As the lesson ended, Mary packed her things quietly while the other students left, chatting as usual. She lingered, waiting for the room to empty. Miss Judith stood at the board, erasing equations with quick, precise movements, not even glancing at Mary. The girl hesitated, wanting to say something but deciding against it. Instead, she walked out, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Left alone, Miss Judith paused, the eraser still in her hand. Her gaze lingered on the part of the equation Mary had pointed out. Deep down, she knew the girl was right, but admitting it felt impossible. Behind her cold demeanor, a growing discomfort stirred, a realization that Mary was more than just a brilliant student. She was a challenge to the perfection Miss Judith prided herself on. The next morning, the classroom felt heavy with unresolved tension. Mary entered, clutching her worn-out notebook and holding her head high despite the lingering unease. Her passion for mathematics remained unshaken. Miss Judith began the lesson in her usual firm, no-nonsense tone, but as she explained a new formula on the board, she made another small error in her calculations. Mary noticed it immediately. For a few seconds, she hesitated, recalling the previous day's encounter. But this time, Miss Judith's reaction was different. She softened her tone, acknowledging Mary's brilliance. "You're a brilliant student, Mary. Maybe the most brilliant I've ever taught. But I know that doesn't mean you don't have your struggles. I understand that life outside of school can be difficult sometimes." Those words, spoken with such care, struck a chord deep within Mary. She took a deep breath, though her voice trembled as she spoke. "My home isn't an easy place," she began hesitantly. "My parents fight all the time. I try not to listen, but it's hard. They yell a lot, and it doesn't feel like it's ever going to change." She paused, gripping her pencil tightly. "That's why I study so much, because it's the only thing that makes me feel like one day I can leave and have a different life." Miss Judith felt a pang in her chest. Every word Mary spoke carried a silent pain, one Judith recognized more than she cared to admit. "Mary, I'm so sorry you're going through this," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sympathy. "I didn't know school was the only place where you could find peace." Mary gave a faint smile, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "School is where I can build something better for myself," she said quietly. "At home, there's no room for anything of my own. But here, with books and numbers, I feel like I can control something, at least a little." Judith was momentarily overwhelmed by Mary's maturity, by the strength forged in hardship. "You're very strong, Mary," she said gently. "Not just in your intelligence, but in how you carry all of this. I promise I won't be an obstacle for you anymore." Mary met Judith's gaze, and for a moment, a genuine connection flickered between them. "Thank you, Miss Judith," she said simply, her voice holding gratitude, but also a trace of relief, as if someone had finally acknowledged the weight she bore. That night, Judith couldn't sleep. Mary's words echoed in her mind, stirring emotions she hadn't expected. The girl had a strength few adults could muster, and Judith knew she had a responsibility to help lighten Mary's burden. No longer just a teacher, she realized she could make a meaningful difference in Mary's life, and she was determined to do so. The spark of opportunity. The morning sun filtered timidly through the classroom windows, casting a soft glow on the rows of desks. Mary entered the room, her worn notebook clutched tightly to her chest. Despite the lingering tension from the previous days, she held her head high, her passion for mathematics unshaken. The classroom was her sanctuary, a place where the chaos of home couldn't reach her. Here, she could focus on the numbers, the equations, the logic that made sense in a world that often didn't. Miss Judith stood at the front of the room, her usual aura of authority firmly in place. She began the lesson with her characteristic no-nonsense tone, writing a series of complex equations on the board. Mary followed every detail with absolute focus, her mind racing ahead to solve the problems before Miss Judith even finished explaining them. But today, something was different. Miss Judith's demeanor, though still stern, carried a subtle softness, a hint of something Mary couldn't quite place. As the lesson progressed, Miss Judith made another small error in her calculations. Mary noticed it immediately. For a moment, she hesitated, recalling the previous day's encounter. But this time, instead of raising her hand to point out the mistake, she kept silent, her gaze fixed on her notebook. She didn't want to risk another confrontation, not when the classroom was the only place she felt safe. Miss Judith, however, seemed to sense Mary's hesitation. She paused, her eyes scanning the room before landing on Mary. "Mary," she said, her voice firm but not unkind, "would you like to come up to the board and solve this problem for us?" Mary's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't used to being called upon in such a direct manner, especially after the tension of the past few days. But she nodded, rising from her seat and walking to the front of the room. The eyes of her classmates followed her, some curious, others skeptical. Mary took a deep breath, kicked up a piece of chalk, and began to work through the problem. Her movements were deliberate, each line of the equation carefully calculated. As she solved the problem, the room fell silent, the only sound the soft scratching of chalk on the board. When she finished, she stepped back, her eyes meeting Miss Judith's. The teacher studied the board for a moment before nodding. "Well done, Mary," she said, her tone carrying a note of genuine approval. "You've solved it correctly." A small smile tugged at the corners of Mary's lips, but she quickly suppressed it, returning to her seat with a quiet sense of accomplishment. The rest of the lesson passed without incident, but Mary couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between her and Miss Judith. After class, as the other students filed out of the room, Miss Judith called Mary to stay behind. Mary's heart raced as she approached the teacher's desk, unsure of what to expect. Miss Judith's expression was unreadable, but there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Mary," Miss Judith began, her voice steady, "I want to talk to you about something important." She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "Have you heard of the National Mathematics Competition?" Mary shook her head, her curiosity piqued. "No, Miss Judith. What is it?" "It's an annual competition for exceptional math students," Miss Judith explained. "The winners receive scholarships to some of the best schools in the country. I immediately thought of you. You have everything it takes to win." Mary's eyes widened, momentarily speechless. The idea of competing on a national level was both thrilling and daunting. "I've never participated in anything like that," she confessed. "Am I really good enough?" Miss Judith leaned forward, her gaze steady. "Mary, you're one of the brightest minds I've ever met. This competition is made for people like you, but it won't be easy. It will take hard work, dedication, and courage." Mary's heart raced. The opportunity was life-changing, but the challenge felt overwhelming. "What if I fail?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Miss Judith placed her hand gently over Mary's, a rare gesture of empathy. "You won't fail. But even if you don't win, just trying will be a huge step. Trust me, I'll be with you every step of the way." Convinced by Miss Judith's sincere resolve, Mary felt a spark of confidence bloom within her. "Okay," she said softly, determination creeping into her voice. "I'll do it." From that day forward, Mary threw herself into preparing for the competition. Miss Judith provided her with extra materials, challenging problems, and guidance. The two spent hours after school working through complex equations, discussing strategies, and refining Mary's skills. It was grueling work, but Mary embraced it with a fervor that surprised even herself. As the weeks passed, Mary's confidence grew. She began to see herself not just as a student, but as a competitor, someone capable of achieving greatness. The classroom, once a sanctuary, became a training ground, a place where she could push herself to new limits. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were moments of doubt, times when the weight of expectation felt too heavy to bear. In those moments, Miss Judith was there, offering encouragement and support. "You're stronger than you think, Mary," she would say. "Don't let fear hold you back." Mary took those words to heart, using them as fuel to keep going. She knew that the competition was more than just a chance to win a scholarship. It was an opportunity to prove to herself that she could rise above her circumstances, that she could create a future filled with possibility. The day of the competition arrived, and Mary felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as she entered the large auditorium where the event was being held. Students from across the country filled the room, each one as determined as she was. Miss Judith gave her a reassuring smile before taking her seat among the other teachers. The competition was intense, a series of challenging problems that tested every ounce of Mary's knowledge and skill. She worked through each one with focus and determination, her mind sharp and clear. When the final problem was solved, she sat back, exhausted but exhilarated. As the results were announced, Mary's heart pounded in her chest. When her name was called as one of the winners, she felt a surge of emotion unlike anything she had ever experienced. Miss Judith's eyes shone with pride as she watched Mary accept her award, a scholarship to one of the best schools in the country. In that moment, Mary knew that her life was about to change. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. She had proven to herself that she was capable of greatness, that she could rise above the chaos of her past and create a future filled with hope and possibility. As she stood on that stage, holding her award, Mary felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She had found her strength, her purpose, and she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same determination and resilience that had brought her this far. The classroom, once her sanctuary, had become the launching pad for her dreams. And as she looked out at the audience, her eyes met Miss Judith's, and she knew that she had found not just a teacher, but a mentor, a guide, and a friend. Mary's journey was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. She had proven to herself that she could overcome anything, and she knew that with hard work, dedication, and the support of those who believed in her, she could achieve anything she set her mind to. The weight of expectations. The days following the National Mathematics Competition were a whirlwind of emotions for Mary. The scholarship she had won was more than just a ticket to a better school. It was a validation of her hard work, her intelligence, and her resilience. But with the excitement of her achievement came a new set of challenges. The weight of expectations, both from herself and from those around her, began to press down on her shoulders. Mary returned to her small, dimly lit home, the award clutched tightly in her hands. She had hoped that her success would bring a sense of pride to her parents, a moment of unity in their fractured household. But as she stepped through the door, the familiar tension in the air quickly dashed those hopes. Her father sat at the kitchen table, his face buried in a newspaper, while her mother stood at the sink, scrubbing dishes with a ferocity that suggested she was battling more than just grease. Mary hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I won," she said softly, holding up the award. "I won the competition." Her father glanced up briefly, his expression unreadable. "That's good," he muttered before returning to his paper. Her mother didn't even turn around. "Dinner's almost ready," was all she said. Mary's heart sank. She had hoped for more. A smile, a word of encouragement, anything. But the silence that followed her announcement was deafening. She retreated to her room, the faded blue walls closing in around her as she placed the award on her makeshift shelf. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the sting of disappointment, but then she took a deep breath, and reminded herself of why she had worked so hard in the first place. The next morning, Mary returned to school with a renewed sense of purpose. The classroom, once her sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield where she had proven her worth. Miss Judith greeted her with a warm smile, her eyes filled with pride. "I knew you could do it, Mary," she said. "This is just the beginning." But as the days turned into weeks, Mary began to feel the pressure mounting. The scholarship came with high expectations, and the school she would be attending was known for its rigorous academic standards. She spent hours each night studying, determined not to let this opportunity slip through her fingers. The numbers and equations that had once been her escape now felt like a heavy burden, each problem a reminder of how much she had to lose. One afternoon, as Mary sat in the classroom working through a particularly difficult problem, Miss Judith noticed the strain on her face. "Mary," she said gently, "you've been pushing yourself very hard. It's important to take breaks, to give yourself time to breathe." Mary looked up, her eyes tired but determined. "I can't afford to take breaks," she said. "There's so much I need to learn, so much I need to prove." Miss Judith sighed, her expression softening. "Mary, you've already proven so much. You don't need to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. It's okay to ask for help, to lean on others when you need to." Mary nodded, but the words didn't fully sink in. She was used to carrying her burdens alone, to relying on herself to get through the tough times. The idea of asking for help felt foreign, almost uncomfortable. As the weeks passed, the pressure continued to build. Mary's grades remained strong, but the toll it was taking on her was evident. She began to withdraw from her classmates, her focus solely on her studies. The joy she had once found in solving problems was replaced by a sense of obligation, a fear of failure that loomed over her like a dark cloud. One evening, as Mary sat at her desk, struggling to focus on her work, she heard a soft knock at her door. She turned to see Miss Judith standing in the doorway, a look of concern on her face. "May I come in?" she asked. Mary nodded, and Miss Judith entered the room, taking a seat on the edge of the bed. "Mary," she began, her voice gentle, "I've noticed that you've been struggling lately. I know how much pressure you're under, but I want you to know that you're not alone. You don't have to face this all by yourself." Mary looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just don't want to let anyone down. I've worked so hard to get here, and I can't afford to fail." Miss Judith reached out, placing a hand on Mary's shoulder. "Mary, you're not going to fail. But you need to remember why you started this journey in the first place. It's not just about the grades or the awards. It's about finding your passion, your purpose. Don't let the pressure take that away from you." Tears welled up in Mary's eyes as the weight of Miss Judith's words hit her. She had been so focused on meeting expectations that she had lost sight of why she loved math in the first place. It wasn't just about solving problems. It was about the sense of accomplishment, the joy of discovery, the feeling of creating something meaningful. "I don't want to lose that," Mary said, her voice trembling. "But it's so hard to keep going when it feels like everything is riding on this." Miss Judith smiled softly. "I know it's hard, Mary, but you're stronger than you think, and you don't have to do it alone. I'm here for you, and so are others who care about you. Let us help you carry the load." Mary took a deep breath, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to relax, to let go of the pressure that had been weighing her down. She realized that she didn't have to face this journey alone, that it was okay to lean on others for support. As the days went on, Mary began to find a balance between her studies and her well-being. She started to reconnect with her classmates, to find joy in the simple moments of laughter and camaraderie. The numbers and equations that had once felt like a burden began to feel like old friends again, a source of comfort and inspiration. Mary knew that the road ahead would still be challenging, but she also knew that she had the strength and the support to face whatever came her way. She had proven to herself that she could overcome adversity, that she could rise above the chaos of her past and create a future filled with hope and possibility. And as she looked out at the classroom, her eyes meeting Miss Judith's, she knew that she had found not just a teacher, but a mentor, a guide, and a friend. Together, they would continue to navigate the challenges ahead, one problem at a time. The dawn of a new beginning. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the classroom, casting a golden glow on the rows of desks. Mary sat at her usual spot, her notebook open in front of her, but today was different. Today was her last day at this school before she would move on to the prestigious academy she had earned a scholarship to. The room was filled with a bittersweet atmosphere, a mix of excitement for the future and nostalgia for the past. Miss Judith stood at the front of the room, her usual stern demeanor softened by a rare smile. "Class," she began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Today we say goodbye to one of our brightest stars. Mary has shown us what determination, resilience, and hard work can achieve. She's not just a student, she's an inspiration." The room erupted into applause, and Mary felt her cheeks flush with a mix of pride and humility. She looked around at her classmates, many of whom she had grown closer to in recent months. They had become her support system, her friends, and she realized how much she would miss them. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Mary lingered in the classroom, packing her belongings slowly. Miss Judith approached her, holding a small wrapped gift. "Mary," she said, her voice warm, "I wanted to give you something to remember us by." Mary took the gift, her hands trembling slightly as she unwrapped it. Inside was a beautifully bound notebook, its cover embossed with intricate mathematical symbols. "This is for your new journey," Miss Judith explained. "A place to record your thoughts, your discoveries, and your dreams." Tears welled up in Mary's eyes as she looked at the notebook, then at Miss Judith. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "For everything." Miss Judith placed a hand on Mary's shoulder, her eyes filled with pride. "You've come so far, Mary. But remember, this is just the beginning. The world is full of possibilities, and you have the talent and the determination to achieve anything you set your mind to." Mary nodded, clutching the notebook to her chest. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of closure and excitement for the future. As she walked out of the classroom for the last time, she paused at the doorway, turning back to take one final look. The room, once her sanctuary, now felt like a launching pad, a place where her dreams had taken flight. Outside, the sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow on the school grounds. Mary took a moment to soak it all in, the memories of her journey flashing before her eyes. She thought of the late nights spent studying, the challenges she had overcome, and the support she had received from Miss Judith and her classmates. As she walked down the path leading away from the school, Mary felt a sense of peace and readiness. She knew that the road ahead would be filled with new challenges, but she also knew that she had the strength and the resilience to face them. The notebook in her hands felt like a symbol of her journey, a reminder of how far she had come and how much further she could go. Mary's heart was filled with gratitude for the people who had believed in her, for the opportunity she had been given, and for the strength she had found within herself. She knew that her story was far from over, that this was just the beginning of a new chapter filled with endless possibilities. As she stepped into the future, Mary felt a sense of hope and excitement. She was ready to embrace the challenges, to chase her dreams, and to create a life filled with purpose and passion. And as she walked away from the school, her head held high and her heart full of determination, she knew that she was not just a student, but a beacon of inspiration for anyone who dared to dream. The sun continued to shine brightly, casting a golden light on the path ahead. Mary took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, and stepped forward into the dawn of a new beginning. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.